Hi, my name is Douglas Vode. I am the publisher of Vector Associates. And after 30 plus years, I finally got my friend Abelard Reichland to do an interview of his infamous or famous book called The True Authorship of the New Testament. Some of you may have seen it advertised in Nation, New Republic, etc., where it says, Flavius Josephus writes New Testament. Well, he's the first one in history that openly wrote about it and figured out the whole family relationship of who wrote the New Testament, when the books were written, the code systems that the Pisos used in writing it. So if you're a theologian, amateur, professional, regardless whether you're Catholic, Protestant, Baptist, Jewish, or even if you're a Muslim and curious about this whole story, you're going to love this. This is a real treat. You're going to learn more about not only Roman history, but the code systems and how it was written, and the proof that Abelard is right and everybody else is wrong. So I've got a couple of questions for him. And what you see above us here is the family tree that we'll partially go through, so you understand the relationship of who wrote what, how the books were written, the years they started, and how it progressed. Because that's a big mystery for many scholars, is how the books were written, when they were, and stuff like that. So, Abelard, thank you for taking my invitation and finally doing this. First question. What came you about? Why did you decide to write this, or how did you get curious about the New Testament?
Many people are curious about the New Testament. They can't understand why a small group of supposedly persecuted Christians could persevere in the catacombs for 35 years, hiding from the Roman legionaries who supposedly are trying to find and kill them. When the legionaries knew the catacombs far better than did these poor, straggling, uneducated Christians.
For sure.
And it's a mystery. Where were they for 35 years, and how did they come out of the catacombs well and alive after 35 years with great new leaders that nobody had ever heard of before? Where did the Christians come from? How did they escape the legionaries in the catacombs for 35 years? That's how I got onto it. I was an attorney for over 50 years, but like many people want to become an attorney and they don't make it, I made it to become an attorney, and I always wanted to become a detective. Well, I read Agatha Christie, I read Sherlock Holmes, and then I got onto the New Testament because I was so curious about how did they manage to hide for 35 years in the catacombs.
I want to also explain one thing. The reason why we're not showing his face, he's going to be famous one day, really famous. But he doesn't want to be that famous right now, as the subject is sensitive to a lot of people. And it affects two of the world's great religions. So you're going to see his lovely head in the back of his head. And but to give you an idea, he's been selling this book, or we have also, since 79, I think it was, right, when we first published
1981, finally.
Well, that's when you finally decided to bring it public,
right.
Instead of just trying to get the rabbis to accept it.
Because my Jewish friends were just
too stubborn.
Too stubborn and too afraid to get involved with Christianity because they had had so many problems of being persecuted, hated, treated with contempt, and finally murdered in mass in Catholic Europe and in Russia and in Poland, and they didn't want any part of this.
No question. But over the years, if you search on the internet, if you search for just Arius Calpurnius Piso, the star of this story, you'll find 335 web pages that have the name listed. For Abelard Reichland, which is him, 3080 mention him, which means they're talking about the true authorship. And when you search for true authorship of the New Testament, with quotes around it, of course, You get 967. That's how many web pages or news groups have people talking about the book. Some have estimated that as many as 1 million people worldwide know about the Pisos, and it's all because of him and releasing this information to the world. So, let me see. My first question, I think, for you is, the family tree. Let's get to the first thing. Who was the first one who came up with the idea of a Jesus Savior?
The one who came up with the idea of a Savior for the Judeans, as the Jews were then called, was T. Flavius Sabinus, who was the head of the Flavian family who lived in Etrusca, which was Etruria, which was northwest of the city of Rome. And their leader was T. Flavius Sabinus. Sabinus was because it was near the Sabine River. Flavius was because it was gold, and they liked that for their name. T. Flavius Sabinus. He wrote, not much, but he wrote a small compendium of Roman history under the name, his literary name of Velleius Paterculus. And he was the one who came up with the idea and gave it to his son, who happened to be married to Arachina Sr., or Arius Sr., who turns out to be the link between the two families.
Yeah, we have two families here. We have, the father was Velleius Paterculus. He's the one who gave the idea to
his son,
Velleius, the son, Sabinus. The other son became Vespasian, the emperor, and died in 96.
No, in 81.
Died in 81?
His son, Domitian, his son and last successor, died in 96.
Oh, got it. Okay. So, when did he take power?
He took power in 79.
So he was there for 2 years.
So he was only there for 2 years.
Maybe,
but his son Titus ruled with him, and Titus lived until the year 69 he took over, not 79. He took over in 69.
Oh, 69, okay.
And Titus ruled till 79, when supposedly he ate some poisoned boiled fish, perhaps supplied intentionally or unintentionally by his brother Domitian. And Domitian took over and ruled until 96. That was the end of the Flavian dynasty.
So, the important part here is also his wife was Arius Sr., and their daughter, Aria Jr., winds up marrying
of the great one.
Well, the father of Arius, Gaius C. Calpurnius Piso, also known as Reippatus. His wife is Aria Jr., and there's an interesting story about that we'll get to later with the emperor. Okay, we'll stop at this point, and we'll go on to this after these other questions. Who did the story pass through that eventually ended up as the current version of the bookmark? The bookmark is evidently the first one, and evidently the most difficult to figure out.
It is, because it had so many different authors adding things to it.
So we have him giving the idea
to his son, who writes the earliest version, but it doesn't have a lot of the names in it yet.
No.
It's basically just a sketch. Then his son-in-law, Gaius C. Piso, takes over and finishes Marcus.
Now, the reason why it's Marcus is why?
From Sabinus's name. Furius was a noble name in Roman history of a great conqueror, and he was one of those who used the name Furius. It meant ferocious, and it also meant, from the German, it supposedly meant original. But actually, it was a name that ties together the Pisos for a number of generations, including the fact that eventually the fictional King Arthur has a fictional father who is named Furius Pendragon. So Furius was a great honorable name.
So all they did was chop off the F and chop off the suffix.
That's right.
And they had Marcus.
From.
So he's giving credit to Flavius Sabinus for developing it further than Paterculus.
That's right.
Basically it. So basically there's like 4 different authors to this, Mark.
That's why it's so complicated.
It's the hardest book to figure out. So we have the father, Gaius Calpurnius Piso, his wife, Aria Jr. At this point, I wanted to say in the book Mark, it doesn't talk about a virgin birth at all. That was developed later. In chapter 1, verse 11, it then says, "And there came a voice from heaven saying, 'Thou art my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased.'" Now that happens after John the Baptist baptizes him, but the reason why they use that as a son is because they were plagiarizing right from Ezekiel, where in, I think, chapter 41 or 42, there's a prince who sits in front of, with God, and the prince is obviously the son of a king, and that's where they borrowed it from. And later, in chapter 6, verse 3, it then winds up saying, "Is not the carpenter the son of Mary?" They finally introduce the name Mary, which means Gaius must have written from that section on. But explain why he uses Mary.
They used Mary, which was later it was the name Mary. They used the name Mariam, M-A-R-I-A-M, because they wanted to create a tie-in with Moses' mother, Miriam, but they changed the I to an A because Piso was playing the game that he was the mother as well as the father, like the rhyme in one of the Shakespearean plays, which speaks of "I'm my mother, father, and yet his child," etc., etc., etc. One man playing many parts on the stage of life, as the Shakespearean writings also say.
I like to add one thing. In the booklet, when you buy it, if you buy it, on page 7, there's the code system that he uses, the Pisos use, Greek large numbering, small numbering, and the sequence system. In large numbering, the reason why he chose Mariam is he adds an M in the front and the M in the back of his mother's real name. And so we have Piso, the first letter of Piso is pi, and pi was equal to 80 in Greek large numbering. So in essence, he's saying it's him. The M and M is 80, so it's Aria Piso, or feminine version of his own name, Arius Piso.
That's right. He's saying that I am the mother as well as the father.
He's everything.
M on either end with the feminine form of my name of Arius. In the middle is Aria. M plus Aria plus M means feminine myself plus 80. 40 and 40, which is 80.
Now, the virgin birth, we have to say it because it ties out with this guy. Gaius Caligula, the emperor, the degenerate emperor. I had found it's in your second book, your larger book, the reference. On Gaius Calpurnius Piso's wedding night with Aria Jr., what does he do?
According to Roman history, I'm not sure where I got it from. Someplace.
The reference is there, I got it.
Suetonius, I believe. Is that right?
You talk, I'll get it.
All right.
Go ahead. You give the explanation, I'm going to find it.
Suetonius was Piso's grandson. He took the name from the general Suetonius who conquered Boeotia in the 100 years prior to this time. And in that battle, Suetonius Paulinus was a Roman general, so he was honored with the fictional name of Suetonius. But he wasn't really that much of a military man. He was a great writer. He became the Emperor Antoninus in 138 and then wrote up to his time a compendium of Gnostic literature, and he gave it the name Gnostic literature. And so we have from Suetonius Gnostic literature, and we also have from him the lives of the 12 Caesars, up to just before the time of the taking of power of Vespasian. And he posits the rule, which the information which Doug will tell you about that. And it's really a very humorous thing. I don't want to treat this too humorously, although Piso had a fantastic sense of humor.
He was basically sticking his finger in the Roman aristocracy. They all knew this, that his real father was Gaius Caligula. It must be in the later section. I can't find it, but I know it's in here. I found it earlier. That was the deep, dark family secret. Now, the other part of Caligula is...
He was possibly illegitimate.
Well, the beauty of the whole...
to flaunt the Roman aristocracy back. Say, look, I'm entitled to be emperor. My father was Caligula.
And everybody knows it.
And everybody's teasing me about it. So the heck with them. I'm going to flaunt it back.
The other part of this thing is this. He was such a degenerate. He forced the Roman aristocracy to worship him as a god. So by Piso putting in there that God is the father, Mary's the mother, he's really talking about his own life. Mariam is his mother, and everybody had assumed he was God, or had to worship him as a god. So basically, the Roman god is his father, Gaius Caligula, and that's his mother, and he's the offspring. So it was not a virgin birth, obviously, but a Roman god, Gaius Caligula, was his real father, his real paternal father. That's the scandal that the Roman aristocracy knew about, because he must have had her for over a month after the wedding, and got her pregnant, and 6 months later, he's born in 37.
Yes, it was 9 months, about 9 months after the wedding.
So we know who the father is. There's no question about it. So, and that's the joke. And that's maybe why they got together, figured his sons were in line to be emperors, because Gaius Caligula was the emperor. Okay, I'll go on. Okay, who's the main designer of the NT? Who's the guy who put it together after the father got done with it?
Fabius Justus took over. All of his other brothers, the four of them.
Well, I think we're jumping ahead. I'm really talking about Arius Calpurnius Piso. He's the guy who really was the designer and organizer.
He was the director. He was everything. 2 books had not been finished by the time he died in 118. They were Romans, the epistles of the Romans, and they also consisted of the book of Hebrews. They were written by his sons after his death. But everything else had been finished. Even the letters had been finished. He and his grandson Arian collaborated under other names, which we didn't correct in the booklets, but they're largely by Piso and Arian. There are 5 or 6 of these small letters at the end of the New Testament. They're also by Piso, but Piso with the help of his grandson Arian, whom he was training to be his successor in a literary sense on the Christian writings.
What were some of the other pen names? The world knows him as Flavius Josephus. That's the most one.
Flavius Josephus. But he never lived as Josephus.
This is Weston's translations.
Piso. That book by
Weston.
By Weston is the famous book of the writings of Josephus. There is another series which we advise you to get if you can afford it, or read them in the library. Order them by interlibrary loan. Those are, I think, 11 volumes now, and they sell for $20, $22, perhaps less.
The Lobes?
The Loeb Classical Library editions of Josephus. They have a lot of information in there, and they have the Greek on one side and the English on the other. They're easier to understand, but it takes scholarly work because it's not a quick read.
By the way, that's how most of the pastors and others get into the inner circle. They're curious about it. They start reading Josephus. The first mention of Jesus is in his Testimonium Flavianum, because he's the guy who wrote it. That's why it's there. But anyway, so that was one of the pen names. What are some of the others of Piso?
Titius Aristo, that was his name. These names appear in the writings of his much younger half-brother, who is also his granddaughter's husband, Pliny the Younger. He was finally admitted to the group, and they allowed him to write.
Half-brother.
That's right, his much younger half-brother. Titius Aristo is a Roman jurist.
Plutarch.
He wrote as Plutarch, of course, the moralist.
That's a joke by itself.
Great writer. He was also Titinius Capito, a philosopher. He wrote as Nicomachus of Gerasa, a Pythagorean mathematician.
He also was the general at the siege of Masada. Under what name?
Flavius Silva. Flavius again comes back. Now he's Flavius Silva. He
this is why.
Masada.
Because you relate to the Flavians.
And he forces the suicide, if it happened, of the zealots defending the mountaintop of Masada before the Romans would break in the morning and slaughter them all, torture them and slaughter them. Supposedly they committed suicide. 960 people, he said.
Right, it's
Romans never bothered to count the bodies of their victims. They just shoveled them into the pit and covered them over and celebrated, got drunk. They didn't care about that. This time they counted the bodies, 960. Why?
Made up of?
Because 300 was T, which stood for Christianity.
The cross.
600 was the first letter of Christos, Chi.
In large numbering.
That's right. And 60 was the name Calpurnius Piso in small numbering. 41 was the total of the name Calpurnius, that's right. 19 was the total of the name Piso. It was Piso, Calpurnius Piso, and Christianity, and the total was 960. There were also, according to Josephus himself, 7 people who didn't get killed by suicide, 2 women and 5 children in hiding. That made the total 967. But 67 was Piso too. If you try the sequence system, the letters of Piso in sequence in the Greek alphabet total 67. That's why there are 967 actually. Much later, the predecessor to the story of King Arthur, written by the popes, various chapters written by the popes. This was a writing of a early church father who wrote under the name of a Danish writer who wrote of the name escapes me now, but it's an early version of the King Arthur stories, and he single-handedly repels the invading Saxons. Guess how many he slew single-handedly?
Go for it.
To defend Rome, to defend Britain against the invasion by Saxons? You'll never guess. 960. Where did he get 960? Leave that to your imagination. But there were 960. One man slew and defeated the invading Saxons.
Well, at this point, since we're dealing with numbers and stuff like that, his eldest surviving son, he had an older son, Alexander, who evidently died in Judea earlier.
No, I think he died in Asiatic Turkey.
Same place. I mean, same area. Yeah. The description of it and stuff like that is in Plutarch, where he comforts his wife. But anyway, Julius is the one who wrote Revelation, and you're going to now know who Satan is. And this is his son. We'll explain it a little later. Well, why don't we do it now? Why Plutarch, where he comforts his wife. But anyway, Julius is the one who wrote Revelation, and you're going to now know who Satan is. And this is his son. We'll explain it a little later. Well, why don't we do it now? Why Revelation was even written, and who 666 is. Go for it.
Continue the suspense.
Right, go for it.
Go for it. Okay. He wrote Revelation, and he also, I figured out, but this is not in the booklet, this is since the time of the booklet, he also wrote the Gospel of Judas. Because he didn't like the family. He was mad. His family His son had conquered Bar Kokhba, destroyed the Jews in the third and final Roman-provoked revolt.
He was the general.
He was his son was a general. Also was the name with the name of Julius Severus, and he came back to Rome, and they thought he would treat him to being part of the ruling class. The emperor, vice emperor, no, they didn't. Justus had things under his thumb. He didn't trust any of his brothers, and not only that, but he knew Justus was scheming for total power.
Well, he was the oldest son.
And he was the oldest son, and as you've pointed out to me, amongst the Romans, presumably the oldest son would get the power.
Sure.
So Fabius Justus put him on trial for writing Revelation because he had mocked the family so much in Revelation.
Mm-hmm.
That's why there's so many strange things in Revelation. He's mocking his own family. They didn't contain Revelation in the New Testament canon for perhaps 50 years after that, because they weren't sure whether to put it in, whether it was safe. They finally did. But Fabius Justus survived. He was always loyal to his family. His other two brothers died because of what he did. And, and he lasted.
666, or else I'm going to say it.
666, go ahead.
Okay. After his younger brother, Fabius Justus, screws him out of having his son become emperor after Hadrian, he winds up making Pliny the Younger, who's now deceased already, who was deceased by then, he makes him the 27-horned beast coming out of the water.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Revelation.
He's the 144,000 that survives. 100 is KP, Calpurnius Piso. K is 20, P is 80, 100. 44 is Fabius Justus in Greek small numbering. So yes, it's true. He did survive after this. The father is Satan. And this is how. The first letter of Christos is 600 in Greek large numbering. But what's 66? Flavius Josephus. Flavius is 30. Josipos is 36 in Greek small numbering. Together, 66. In the Greek manuscripts, it's 616. 616, same thing. 600 is Christos. And 16th letter of the Greek alphabet is P, pi for Piso. So it's Daddy and his creation. So don't worry about some character showing up as being Satan. Julius already identified who Satan really is. The great deceiver, Piso himself. His own son calling his father Satan. Of course, he was, because he created the name and the concept Satan.
As the British author Thackeray said, "Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive." And he was absolutely correct. It was a tangled weave, but they practiced to deceive, and they deceived the world, and it has lasted for 2,000 years.
Next question. How did you connect Flavius Josephus, the public name, with his real name?
That is a complicated process. I devoted a chapter of that, proving that
in the book.
Flavius Josephus was Arius Calpurnius Piso. I did not cover 100% of the things we've related to.
All over the years.
My friend Doug figured we should give as large a smattering of information as possible,
yeah,
so people would understand as best you can. It's a
but
difficult
the proof is in the book.
But you'll figure out about 90% of what you said. We didn't get into Flavius, to Velleius Paterculus' connection.
This is for the real scholars. This part is real scholar stuff.
If you want to go beyond that, you write to us, and we will try to give you information on the connection of Velleius Paterculus to it.
But we answered the idea, the authorship of Mark through four hands, basically.
Right. And the story is, as some of my friends have called it, it's not only fiction. It's not only fraud. It is not only a hoax and a swindle, which has been going on for 2,000 years. It is also 2,000 years of mental abuse. Jews have been physically abused, murdered, treated as Satan, stereotyped as minions of Satan, of the devil. led to Hitler, a psychopath and a sociopath, all because of church teachings for 2,000 years that the Jews were evil. It's all fiction.
And they knew it.
But he did it, and they did it out of ego. Without his ego,
Agreed to.
the greatest ego, the greatest writer that the world has ever seen was Arius Calpurnius Piso. But without his ego, without all these code systems, without all this trail of breadcrumbs, nobody would ever have known the secret. But of course, the church would not have known, and they have held this secret tightly to their breast, refusing to give it up, not caring what people say, as long as you don't mention the name Piso and you don't connect Josephus with it. The church will like you, they'll love you, they'll say you're a true Christian. Don't mention the word Piso. That's verboten. That is the bad name you must not mention.
Sorry. The creator of the church, or organizing the church, evidently was Proculus, right?
Proculus was the original one. Then Antoninus.
Maybe that's why they call St. Peter's Cathedral.
On this rock you will found your church. Piso intended his son Proculus as his successor, but Proculus died 2 years after Piso. Fabius Justus remained loyal. He manipulated, he maneuvered, he murdered, he slaughtered, he killed, used intrigue, used marriages, and he succeeded. And he died in bed.
Right.
He died in bed.
Well, I'm sure without any guilt. So that's the sad part of that. Okay, we covered the virgin birth. Okay, what do you think is the real purpose of the Pisos writing the New Testament?
Population control, of course. They wanted to be first to control the slaves and poor people, and they have to pay less. They have to collect fewer taxes from the aristocracy. You didn't have to have a soldier at every door. You could scare the heck out of them.
They use religion.
A lot of fear and a little bit of hope, just like the Stoics controlled the masses before the rise of Christianity. With a combination of fear and hope, you could control these poor illiterate people whom you did not allow citizenship to, you did not allow literacy to, you did not give Bibles or books into their possession. You kept them stupid and illiterate, and as long as you could do that, and it lasted to the 15th century, you could control the masses. Even the Renaissance, which was deliberately set up by the church to mollify the masses, they didn't allow them to read in that time in the 1400s. It wasn't until the invention of the Gutenberg Bible and the printing press, the 1500s, and the rise of Martin Luther and reading your Bible, and then the Brits singing the Spanish Armada in 1588, that Western man finally rose from the control and manipulation, hatred and murder imposed by Christianity, all in the name of love and salvation and kindness.
Well, all the time the religious and political leadership all knew the Pisos had written it.
Because they were induced to join up. Look at the money. Look at the control here.
Well, the leadership wanted control of the masses that way.
Control the masses.
Yeah, control the masses. We covered some of the code systems. Greek large numbering, small numbering, the sequence system. That's explained in the booklet. They have cumulative small numbering. There's a whole bunch of code systems, and I don't want to beat it to death for people, and it's some of it's a little bit complicated. We've mentioned some of it. Did you want to add anything to some of the code systems?
I try to make things simple.
You have to, yeah.
I'm not a classical scholar. I'm an attorney by profession, but I've always believed to try to make things simple for the average person. I wrote it for the average person to understand. We've sold, Doug sold some, I sold a lot, my wife has sold some, friends have sold some. In total, more than 40,000. Never had a person write to me after buying the booklet, and we used to sell them very cheap because we wanted to get maximum exposure to inform the world. It's a responsibility owed to the world, not just to the Jews.
Right.
The world has been enslaved by this People have given money thinking they're going to see Jesus in heaven. There's nobody there in heaven with the name Jesus, because he never existed. He can't be there in heaven if he never was on earth, if there's no story.
I'd like to add something on that.
It's a fictional invention.
Piso got the name Jesus from the Greek translation of Joshua. Joshua's father was Nun, and that's why a Catholic sister is called Nun, N-U-N, spelled the same way. So it's kind of funny. But many parts of the story are very circular. When he uses a name or something like that, it's always for a reason. I was going to say who wrote which books, but I think we'll just cover the main ones rather than all the smaller ones. Like, we know roughly when Mark was written. When was Mark finished by Arius Calpurnius Piso?
He took over in 70 and wrote his own book, Matthew. It was a name which he gave to his father Gaius, and then he took it back for the purpose of writing Matthew, to honor his father.
Yeah.
75 to 80, he wrote a revised gospel according to Mark.
Yeah, his father's.
Right.
Yeah.
Because his father had finished it, even though Vespasian's brother, his grandfather,
Furious.
Piso's grandfather, paternal grandfather, had written it, had written most of it. Luke was written 85 to 90. Luke was after his grandfather,
Furious.
Piso's grandfather, paternal grandfather, had written it, had written most of it. Luke was written 85 to 90. Luke was after the fictional name of his son Fabius Justus, whose real name was Marcus. We discovered that later. He was Marcian, he was Marcus of Byzantium, named after his great-grandfather, who was Piso's grandfather, who was Marcus Calpurnius Piso.
I have it up here, yeah.
Right. He wrote that, and Piso, meanwhile, was writing his Jewish war, Bellum Judaicum, which was 75 to 80. And about 90, he wrote Antiquities, or supervised Antiquities. The Herodians wrote most of Antiquities. And about 100, he wrote his Vita, which was a sequel to his Jewish Antiquities, to inform the aristocracy of all the numbers. He didn't say what they were, but he put in the numbers so they could better understand what he was doing. Because if there was one thing he wanted, it was honor. He was the greatest egotist, the greatest writer, the greatest honor seeker there's ever been. And without him having created all these systems of code, nobody would have ever figured it out.
I think one of his sons even says in a writing, how many wonderful different writing styles you have.
That was Pliny the Younger. Pliny wrote public letters too.
Yeah. And
in one of those, and we neglected to make a note of which one of the public letters it was, he writes to his grandfather, his wife's grandfather, who is also his much older half-brother. He says, "Oh, you write so wonderfully. You write in so many different styles," he said. And he did. He did. And he just loved honor, and he just loved to be praised, and he just loved that his story should last forever, although he wasn't sure. He wrote, when he wrote Ecclesiastes, vanity, vanity, yeah, everything is vanity.
Everything I see is vanity.
Vanity and emptiness. I don't know what will happen to all my life's work. I've worked so hard on my life's work. It may be just thrown out after I die. Who knows? Maybe I've worked for nothing. It's this Ecclesiastes, which the Jews
this is
call
confessionals.
Kohelet, the preacher, is in effect, it's his confession of what he's done.
No question about that.
He couldn't escape from confessing of what he did. And he wrote Ecclesiastes for that purpose. The greatest writer who ever lived. It was a great decision on my part. Until Doug came along I'd had it for 6 years. I'd figured out 75-85% of it. But it's a great responsibility. I used to think, what will all these elderly ladies in tennis shoes in California have to believe in if they didn't have this? Let it be, let it be. But Doug and others finally said, look.
I have an aunt who crosses herself when she passes in front of the church.
Well, look, it's pure faith, and it keeps people on a moral compass. And it's difficult to create as marvelous a system of this, which would support a moral code.
Yeah.
Society needs a moral code. So I had misgivings for years before I took it upon myself to try to spread the word. And I couldn't stop these former Jews, who are now atheists, from running around breaking up Jewish families by talking them into Christianity. And they wouldn't listen. The rabbis wouldn't listen because they were afraid. Christian believers wouldn't listen because they were so content in the arms of Jesus. And who's going to listen? I said to myself, well, the world needs a moral code, but nobody's done it for 2,000 years, and if I don't do it, Jews will continue getting wiped out in pogroms and inquisitions and by Hitlers who are trying to expand their power by using the ideas of Satan against the Jews. And the non-Jewish world will continue mirrored in darkness like some of the British poets have written, and there's no solution. We can shoot rocket ships to the moon, we can clone DNA, we can invent internal combustion engines. Now we've got computers and the internet. All this stuff. One thing is sacrosanct and it must not be told to the masses. Just the leadership get to know? I said, that's fiddle. I'm not going to put up with that. As far as I'm concerned, I know the secret and I'm not going to sit on it and torture myself. People need to be liberated. There are millions of Christians out there who are used for their money and they're laughed at behind their back by their leaders. It's time they found out. It's been a tremendous burden for them. They've been used too, just like Jews have. Everybody needs to be liberated from this.
I wanted to ask one, we're going to merge two. We've covered almost all the points I had here. The book Enoch, I think he first creates the idea and the concept Satan.
No, he refers to the devil and gives him the name Satan in his writings when he sends the angel Gabriel to Mary in the story that you will be mother to a Savior and his name will be Emmanuel. Perhaps they hadn't settled on the name of Jesus yet. I don't know. And then he sends Gabriel again. He comes, either Gabriel or Michael, comes down to see Daniel twice. Very interesting in Daniel.
What year was Daniel?
26. About the year 95. And he comes down to see Daniel. And first time he comes as an angel from heaven, and then he comes down as actual Gabriel. And he tells Daniel, this book should be sealed up and hidden until the world is more educated and is ready for this information. Another confession by Piso that it's all a fraud. But we can't tell people yet. My story may evaporate in 200, 300, 500 years or 1,000 years. He had no idea it was going to last for 2,000 years.
Okay, he created Gabriel earlier than the book Enoch.
Oh, yeah.
Did he create Michael in the book Enoch then? He has two then.
I think he created Michael and Gabriel and then put them into the book of Enoch.
About the year 100.
To predate the book of Enoch to establish a foundation for the names of the archangels.
Right. Because it's not in the Jewish religion at all. It doesn't show up there at all.
The Hebrews have no archangels, just angels appearing.
Correct. And no names
other names.
No names associated with them.
No names. It's not in the Torah. It's not in the Bible. Later in the Talmud, the Jews gave up on that point and they started referring to them and they made up a couple more archangels. So we have 5 archangels, and one of the 5 archangels has a different name, 2 different names for him. But that's where the archangel came from. He had to establish an early foundation to show that in the writer, whoever he may have been, and it was himself, the writer had an ancient foundation for the names of archangels because they were named in the writings that he did of Enoch, which is written about 100 and backdated to the early days of Jewish history, of Judean history.
As I remember, Jesus goes into a cave and sees Satan. Do you remember in one of the stories?
No, I don't think so. He's up on the mountain, and Satan. He tells Jesus to jump, and Jesus won't jump. No, the story about the cave is one that's used in the inception of the Quran.
Which I should mention right now. For all those Muslims watching this and gleefully cheering away and say, "Hey, Christianity is a fraud," I'd like to remind you that through the entire Quran, the "we" mentioned through the whole Quran is referring to chapter 2, verse 98 in the Quran, which is Archangel Gabriel Michael, who theoretically dictates the whole Quran to Muhammad, who was illiterate in a cave. You may have 3 problems here. One, Archangel Gabriel and Michael were created by Piso. They're fictional characters. And Muhammad was illiterate. How is he going to write this stuff down? So you might have a problem with the story.
It's not anybody's fault. Everybody has been used by their church leadership.
Or political leadership in this case.
We've always been used by political leadership.
To control the masses.
The device of religion. The communists said religion is the opiate of the people. And to an extent that's true. It doesn't mean communism is right, because that's also a system of ultimate control.
It's another religion.
It's another religion.
The state becomes God.
The Catholic Church of the Middle Ages, reborn under the name of Bolshevism, just as the Quran is.
It's feudalism, is what it is.
My plea is for ecumenism, where everybody should recognize God, or if they don't believe in God, just follow a moral code. Be kind to each other, as expressed in our booklet on Islam, which we also have available. The idea that people who love their brother of other religions, of no religions, would be doing the right thing. And that's the only way to have peace in the world. We certainly don't need another 700 years war.
No, we don't have 700 years. The last thing
too many horrible weapons in the world today.
The last thing I want to cover is the books that Piso and his relatives wrote and forced the Jews to do the Hebrew translation and put it into the Jewish canon. The reason is many Messianic Jewish groups, as well as Christian groups who are trying to evangelize Jews, try to point to the Piso books to prove that Jesus fulfilled these ancient prophecies. Now, the ones I know of are, and scholars, there's 2 Isaiahs, Isaiah 1 and Isaiah 2. Isaiah 2 goes from chapters 40 to 66. The reason why it is 66 chapters is because we said earlier, Flavius Josephus total 66 in Greek small numbering. The reason he adds 26 chapters is the same reason. You can go tell them the 10 and the 16.
My friend Doug and I disagree on a few things, not on the main thing.
Not on this one, though.
We disagree. I say there were 3 Isaiahs. He says there were 2.
2 for sure.
We can compromise perhaps on 2.5. But one thing's for sure. He got a hold of Isaiah.
He added stuff.
He added all kinds of stuff. And he definitely added, between the end of chapter 42, where the book supposedly ends, up to chapter 66. He also changed Ezekiel. He also added to Jeremiah, his son, Justus, after his father died in 118, and then he murdered his brother and the other 3 counselors. He wrote Micah, he wrote Malachi, put in prophecies of the virgin birth in Bethlehem.
Zechariah.
And he wrote Zechariah at the end of the third Jewish revolt.
Daniel.
He just diluted the Jewish writings to pieces, forced the rabbis at the threat of their lives and at the threat of their religion being extinguished to do translations into Hebrew of these books that he had done. He added innumerable prophecies of the coming of Jesus to the existing Jewish
he also wrote
prophets.
He also wrote First Chronicles and the book Job.
Job is no question. That's another book that's loved by Christian pastors because it's so Christological. Job, and Zechariah, and the book of Esther, and all of these things were written by the Pisos, who wanted to supplant Judaism in every possible way, and they used this way too, by polluting the Jewish writings and changing them around, and the Jews were stuck with them. They could not change them because they were afraid that they will be accused of changing their Jewish Bible and therefore being against history, and they would probably be murdered for that too. The church didn't need many reasons to murder Jews from time to time.
No, they were trying to
control their people.
They were afraid the Jewish leadership knew some of this stuff, and they wanted to kill off as many as they could so the secret would die with them.
Whenever the opportunity came along, for 1900 years, the Jews would be the contempt and hatred accumulated by the...
Who wrote Jonah?
Jonah was written by one of the Pisos too. Jonah was written by Fabius Justus, as I recall, and Ruth was written by Pliny the Younger, and these books were forced into the Jewish writings.
Yeah, well, they had no choice. They were defeated people.
They were defeated people, and they were living only at the sufferance of the Romans.
Correct.
And they didn't want to be slaughtered a fourth time, as it was. Half the Jewish population was deliberately cut down to less than half. Went down to from over 8 million people in the Roman Empire down to about 3.5 million at the end of the Third Revolt. And the Jews gave up, and they turned to their own studies, and the men went to study in the daytime, and the women increasingly became going to the market and having stalls in the markets when they could, supporting the families, and they just basically lived, and until the rise of Islam, they had no place to run away to. Once they were chased out of Rome and out of Spain in 1492, those who could escaped to Turkey and helped the Turks build up their empire. But Jewish history has been very sad, and they've known it, but they don't like to talk about it. Christian history has been very sad for the average person too.
Most of Europe.
From 2,000 years of mind manipulation.
Well, Poland was converted to Catholicism after they killed 100 or 300,000 of them in battle. During the 100 Years' War or the 30 Years' War, one or the other, they slaughtered them.
It's been a history of murder, mass murder of people.
Yeah.
That's what's kept the population down.
Same thing was true for Germany, too.
It's just terrible. Hitler's war killed 40 million people, 6 million Jews deliberately, and another 34 million people who got in the way, including millions of German soldiers.
The Germans lost 5 million, as I remember. The Russians lost 20 million.
This is all because of the use of religion to try to conquer other people.
Yeah. Did you want anything else? I think we covered most of it.
We covered it all. I encourage people to read it.
You can order from here. I'll give you the order. Send a money order to Abelard Reichland Foundation, or Abelard Reichland, P.O. Box 5652D, Kent, Washington 98064. $17. There's $15 for the booklet and $2 for mailing and handling.
Please send a money order. So we'll put the money orders through as quickly as we can pick them up at the
and we'll mail them off.
And mail them
They'll mail them off.
And we won't have to wait for the checks to clear.
Thank you very much.